Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Television Guide Services 101. Where does the guide data come from? Let me introduce myself. I am Heidi Steffen. I am the Chief Revenue Officer here at Titan TV. And I also have with me Chelsea Stumpff. She is our Broadcast Tools Product and Manager. We're going to go over today really a 101 of guide services in the US. How does the data get to where it goes? Who provides the data? How can you update it? And some of the complexity that we've learned this year that has been added to that entire industry. Again, throughout the entire webinar, if you have any questions, there is a question section. Chelsea will be monitoring that for questions, and I'll kind of stop throughout the presentation and answer them as we go. And then one of the top questions we get, will this be recorded and sent to us later? Yes. We are recording this webinar and we will then send it to you afterwards in an email. And that's for anyone that's registered. And then what we'll go ahead and do and also put it on for YouTube that you can then share it and allow others to watch it. So with that, let's dive right into it. So first, who is who in the guide data business? There is really in the US, there are 4 major data providers. The first one is Gracenote. This was formerly known as TMS or Tribune Services. It is now owned by Nielsen. You have TiVo, also known as Xperi. They're formerly Rovi, and they were the original legacy TV guide service. And I also did put this little email address in here because talking to some stations, some still have this old address, and I thought it was a 5th provider. But if it's scheduled at macrovision.com, that's actually part of the TiVo industry or TiVo family. Then you have Redby, also known as FYA Television. They're actually part of the Ericsson International Company. They are who provide guide data, our baseline data, to Titan TV that we then populate our different products and services. And the 4th one that's really started to make more of an introduction and movement in the US is TV Media. They are based out of Canada, but again, they're making their way into the US market. So who provides guided data for all the different guide services? We're talking on-screen guides, online guides, who provides them? And this is important to know, especially as a local broadcaster, because if a consumer calls in and says, hey, your guide's wrong on that TV, you need to know what questions to ask them so you know who to then reach out to get it updated. So let's kick off first with cable. So one thing I want to preference here is this information that we're going to provide throughout the entire presentation is to our knowledge. Most of this we have learned from interactions with stations or our clients when they get called in and they find out then who they were able to then reach out to and find out who was able to update that guide for them. Now, I did reach out to the different guide data providers, but due to non-disclosure agreements, they're not able to let us know actually who they provide guide data to. So again, in this information that is in here, we have learned through our connections with local broadcasters. With that being said, if you notice anything within our presentation that is incorrect, maybe now they have their data provided from someone else, please let us know. We always want to make sure we're providing the most accurate information related to the guide services. So let's start with Gracenote. To our knowledge, it is our understanding that they provide the guide data to the majority of the North American cable companies. So if it is a large cable company and you're unsure who to go to first, we always recommend go reach out to Gracenote, ask them if they provide it, and they'll be able to help you out. Or at least tell them, nope, we don't provide it, and then you can go into step 2. To our knowledge, Redby FYI provides the AT&T Uverse cable. Then we were told with TiVo, any of their customers that could be retail or even a cable company that might be using it, who uses the TiVo guide platform or set-top boxes, they are getting their baseline, their guide data from TiVo. And then when we asked TV Media, basically it said they provide data for many of the smaller cable companies in the US. So if it's something locally and you're unsure, you might want to start off with TV Media. Now, with that being said, though, we have learned in some rare cases, there are sometimes a smaller cable company might actually get the guide data directly from the PSIP data. If you don't know what PSIP is yet, I'll go into that in here shortly, but they're able to pull it right from the digital stream and then put it out into their cable system. There has been some cases I've heard where the station directly sends their guide information to the cable company is put it into their own system and they send it out. So then you are the source for that. So here are some examples of on-screen guides. And what I've started to do when we have a local station says, our guide data is wrong, and let's say we provide them PSIP data, I'm like, can you send me a screenshot of the television? Because you can learn a lot about what you're seeing on the television. The first thing I notice over here is that the numbers are all solid numbers. It's not a 5.1, 6.1. So that I know right away is a cable. The other thing I notice is there are logos. This should be one of the big things to note too as we get into it. If you see an on-screen guide that has logos, you know it is not coming from over the air or PSIP because PSIP cannot deliver images, at least not 1.0. So this example, this is actually Cox. This is provided by a local station. And this one, it's kind of cut off, so I couldn't actually see any of the numbers, so I couldn't do the same there. I can see logos, but the thing that really putting me out here is the golf. We know the golf channel is a cable channel, so I know right away this is a cable lineup on an LG TV, which again, this was Mediacom provided by a viewer. Okay, we're gonna skip from cable to satellite. This one's a little simpler. Again, to our knowledge, TiVo provides the guide data for Dish Network and Grace Note provides it for DirecTV. The last time that we had any update was about a couple years ago, so this could change, but again, that's to our knowledge. Now let's talk about over the air or OTA. So guide data on your TV for over the air comes from PSIP data. In most cases, that is that's inserted to the digital signal. And I just recently add in most cases, and I'll go into why that is. So as I talked about earlier, I'm gonna tell you what PSIP is. So PSIP stands for Program System Information Protocol. This is a FCC requires all full power stations to carry PSIP data in their digital stream. This is so that when consumers at home, however they watch it, through a converter box, a regular TV or smart TV, when they click on the guide, that program titles and descriptions show up. Here's kind of, if you're a visual person, we add this slide. I know it's a little blurry, but it kind of talks about here's all the information from your station. You get it into your MUX, out to your transport, to your antenna, and then it gets into the ATSC 1.0 receiver at the consumer's home. And this is kind of what it looks like on like a converter box. Very simple information, not a lot of details. And you'll see one thing to note here, you have this 5.1, there are no images. This is actually the television, what you're currently airing at that time. So then who provides PSIP data in the US? So Titan TV, we actually provide over 1,000 broadcast stations PSIP data. This includes over 6,000 distinct channels daily. Grace Note also is a PSIP provider. I know there's a large group or two that actually use Grace Note for their PSIP data. Then there's ProTrack by Myers. This is Dimely PBS stations that provides a PSIP to those. We also are aware of there are some stations that have their own station-owned or licensed software that they're using to build and create that PSIP data. And then you can, in a lot of the PSIP hardware, which could be an actual PSIP generator to an encoder, you can actually put what we call static PSIP. And static PSIP is basically, it's 2.1 KCRG, and it could just say KCRG programming. You don't have any other information on each of the programs, is what we call static programming. Now here's where it gets tricky. We have found out in the last year that with some of the newer smart TVs that are connected to the internet and are getting their on-screen guide data, not from PSIP, but in most cases, a third-party guide data provider. We were even working with this with a station today, trying to figure out, they finally realized 2 to 3 TVs were different. So PSIP was coming in correctly. The other television was not getting it from PSIP, they were getting it from a third party. So then they need to reach out to the third-party data provider to update that on-screen guide. So this was an example of one that I found online. This is an OT viewer with a smart TV. There is a link if you want to learn more about it. This is for 1.0. So again, the one thing you're going to see is this is 6.1, 2.1. Now there are logos because again, this is coming from, they're getting the logos from a third party. Again, 3.0, you cannot send out images. And what I can know here from this screenshot is, do they just take the images from a third party, or are they also taking the metadata? And then we have ATS 3.0. Again, with next gen television, it is in the standard that logos and show cards can go out with the digital signal in what they call now ESG data service, which is PSIP for 3.0. But a lot of televisions today, even the ones that have the 3.0 chip, don't have the capability or are not displaying those channel logos or show cards within the guide. This is an example that you might see of a 3.0. This one I actually took off of this particular site. And you'll see a lot of times what I've noticed on the smart TVs that have a 3.0 chip and are receiving 3.0 channels is that actually the channel that is a 3.0 channel or a next gen TV, it will have the next gen TV logo. But you'll even see on this guide, there are no channel logos, there are no show cards here or there. So a lot of times if you get somebody that takes a picture of their television, they say, I have an antenna and I'm receiving it through an antenna, but you see logos and you see show cards here, you can know that more than likely that consumer's television is receiving the guide data from a third party. And most of that third party, I would say, it goes along with the same thing of cable. So I would always reach out to GraceNote first, then go TiVo, and then go from there. Okay, doesn't look like we have any questions, so I'll continue to go through this slide. But again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the question section and we'll answer them throughout this. Now let's talk about over the top. So over the top again is internet, or it's television delivered through internet. And that could be, there are internet or there are OTT platforms. So think of Netflix, Roku are your platforms, where Amazon Prime is a service. So there's different ways that you can receive the OTT or what it is. Now, ones that are receiving linear live television on it, they aren't necessarily getting their guide data from your PSIP again. They're going to get it from a third party. So what we did here, again, to our knowledge, is where we are seeing or have been told that a lot of that linear OTT programming schedule is coming from. So first of all, GraceNote provides data to the big OTT providers except for Netflix. So if you think it's a big OTT provider, more than likely, I would start with GraceNote to get that information updated. TiVo, same thing with on the cable for TiVo Stream. This includes any customer, retailer, cable customer, consumer electronic company that is using their TiVo Stream platform. The data is then provided by TiVo. And then to our knowledge, this one comes up quite often, so we actually kind of pulled this out of. To our knowledge, YouTube gets their programming data schedule from GraceNote. And then there's some things to also keep in mind. So Sling TV, even though it is a dish, it's a satellite, I don't remember which one, it is a satellite product. Their big push for the service is that it comes with a free antenna. So in that case, they're getting their local channels guide data from PSIP that is being sent to their television. Then you also have Paramount Plus, formerly CBS All Access. To our knowledge, this is Red B FYI. And then you have local individual station apps. So you can find them on different TV set platforms, different OTT platforms. A lot of time that guide data normally is being fed directly from the station. Either they're using an internal tool that they built or a third party that will feed data similar to PSIP. We have also and do currently provide some of this data for some of the local station apps. So again, you might, if you're unsure how your local station is populating that guide data for your local station app, I'd go ask and start with your digital team and they should be able to know.
Heidi, we do have a question.
Yes.
Just wanted confirmation about Hulu TV and Fubo, where they get their data from. I want to say GraceNote, but prove me right.
I mean, that's where I would start with the idea that they're one of the big OTT providers, so I would start there. What I don't know about either of those, if it has any sort of TiVo controls, then you would possibly go to TiVo. But again, I would start with GraceNote with Hulu and Fubo. All right, we're going to stay on OTT because here's another one puts a little kink in the whole trying to think of how things work. Roku. And when I was trying in the process of updating this, I've learned more about Roku too. But one thing to ask, if a consumer or viewer calls in and says, you know, the live channel guide's not right, and I have a Roku TV or Roku device, you need to ask, how are you receiving your local channels? Because this I took right off of their website. If someone has an HD, so a digital antenna or antenna that's connected to the Roku TV, they're going to actually pull that in from the PSIP. So they're getting the live stream and the guide data for those channels from over the air. But if they're not connected to an antenna, they're not receiving the local channels through an antenna over the air, then more than likely it's going to be then, I would start with Grace Note as far as providing the data. So here's an example. I did get this one. In this one, when I was doing my research, the reason I know, I'm pretty sure this is a Roku TV, even though when I picked it, it was sent to us, it wasn't stated as that, just because of these controls over here. This is something that if you go to any of the Roku platforms or forums, Roku had gone to this at one point, and a lot of the consumers that have a Roku TV or a Roku platform do not like these controls. I did see an article or video recently, they did change that, so it depends if that television has been updated with the new one. But this one I could tell here was a Roku. Again, you know, here's 19.1, but even though it's 19.1, I don't know if this particular television is set up with an antenna. I'd have to ask, but it does make sense that there are logos, but you'll see right here there is no logo and there's no information. So that kind of makes me think that it is coming from over the air. So again, it's always, this is what makes it much more complicated in the guide industry in the US when a viewer calls in and says their guide's incorrect. Alrighty, we're gonna jump off of on-screen guides, but again, if you have any questions, throw them in the question. We're gonna now move to online guides. They're very similar to the on-screen guides on the television. These are a little easier to determine who provides the data, because a lot of times on the website itself is going to tell you who owns it. So we'll start off with our own consumer site, which is titantv.com. We get our baseline data for RedB for titantv.com, but because of all this, our customers that use either our MediaStar editor or our MediaStar scheduler or manager tool, when they would make a change in the MediaStar tool and they go to publish within that 14-day that shows up on titantv.com, it will automatically update on titantv.com or any of the Titan TV guide services that we provide. So a lot of times what we find is that for local broadcasts, a lot of times Titan TV is going to be more up to date because a lot of stations are within the MediaStar tool making those changes. Then to our knowledge, Zap to it, guide data is provided by Grace Note. tvguide.com, it's to our knowledge that TiVo provides that data. Now, On TV Tonight is one that's come up to us in the last couple of years. It's come up several times. After doing my research, found out this is actually, they're out of Australia. Interesting enough, they provide US data, but they also provide some international data. I don't know how they're aggregating their data, but that is, if it's wrong on there, you need to go directly to them. tvpassport.com is owned and operated by TV Media. And then the other thing I wanted to point out, there are local stations websites that have guides on them as well. So we call them what we call affiliate guides. A lot of times it's just the station's programming information. Sometimes they are like a community guide that we call, where it includes all of the over-the-air channels in their market. Majority of these that are on stations websites are the Titan TV Next Gen affiliate guides. We have still seen some Zap to it guides, and then we have also seen some station built or managed guides. Now, even some of those station built or managed guides, sometimes a third party could still be providing the guide data, but the station itself wants it to look more like its website, and they want certain features or design so that they build the UI and then provide the guide data. I know we provide these for some of the smaller networks and some stations as well. And then the other consumer site that's actually owned and operated by Titan TV that has a guide on it is atennaweb.org. So the other thing I wanted to throw out there, and I added there because there was 2 years ago, there was a different site on here that had a guide. When I did my update, they're no longer in service, no longer a website. So my question, are you aware of any other online guides out there? If you are, and please let us know so we can kind of keep this list up to date. So if someone asks, we can always refer to them and find out what we've learned. Now that you know the guide industry in the US and how things go from where to where and who manages or who updates and provides that guide data, the question we then get is, why are the guides many times inaccurate? Well, it's not a simple answer as we'd hope. First of all, from the time that a station and/or a network sends a change to one of the major data providers, it could take 48 to 72 hours before it's updated in their system and out to where they provide data. And some of that has to do with if you send programming changes in the afternoon, we know, for example, Red Bee, they cut off any of their changes for our data dump that night at like 2 or 3 o'clock Central Time every day. So that any changes received, let's say at 4 o'clock Central, will not get into that data feed that's going to come to us in the overnight process. So I always recommend if you have any changes, send them first thing in the morning. That does one, it gets to the editor right away, and two, it allows the editor to get them updated before that cutoff time. Because sometimes if it's not to the cutoff time, or let's say that editor's out on vacation or sick, it then could get pushed off to the 48 to 72 hours. Now, one thing that Titan TV has developed, and with the goal of trying to shrink in that 48 to 72 hours, to try to get that guide data from a station's programming schedule into the data provider system in quicker time and less human touch, we've developed this tool called direct data reporting that is through our MediaStar scheduler tool. This allows stations to then send their programming schedules electronically to the 4 data providers. We've worked with each one of them to set up a data feed that fits them and how they want it and how they want it delivered. Now we have it live with TV Media, Red Bee, Grace Note. We're still rolling out both Red Bee and Grace Note to the individual stations, but TV Media is on to all of them that have our scheduler, and we're going to go live with TiVo very shortly. With that though, so we've talked about how long it takes to get into a guide data provider system that gets it updated. So now that it's in a guide data services system and they send it out to, let's say, cable boxes, it puts another kink in there, because I found out a couple of years ago, there are some older cable set-top boxes out there in consumers' homes that are only looking for guide data changes once a week. And the only way to really get those set-top boxes out of those homes is if they drop cable and then they go back and pick up cable again, and then they get a new set-top box. It's really not cable's best interest to try to swap out of them as long as they're still working. So that's one thing to keep in mind too for some of your cable viewers, that they only get a change once a week. Do I know when that once a day a week is? I don't. And then there are some cable boxes out there that can and do get the guide data on a more regular basis, but most of them cannot do day of changes. So I always like to use the example, the president's going to speak tonight. More than likely, it's not going to be anywhere except if you have control of how to update your PSIP so that the consumer is over air receiving it and on your website. So those are the areas that you'll be able to dynamically update them based on your guide data provider. And then this is the other thing. So even if we talked about that scenario, so let's say you did update it, you updated even in, let's say, our MediaStar tool, but if your PSIP hardware does not go look for changes on a regular basis, it's not going to pick that day of changes. We know, especially the older PSIP hardware can only manage to pull it once a day. The newer one can, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your engineer set it to look up for changes more than once a day. It can be set up to do it on a more regular basis. Most times I've heard once an hour, but a lot of the PSIP hardware can allow the engineers to make what we call a one-time update. So if you know you have that change and you want that PSIP to be updated, just let your engineer know you've made the change. If you're a Titan TV client, it's updated. They just need to go down and pull down a new file. Any questions? It looks like, Chelsea, can you hear me?
There might be someone, yeah, I can hear you fine. I'm wondering if anyone else is having any issues. If you are not able to hear Heidi, please let us know.
Or if you can hear us, let us know that we know someone's hearing us. Let me. Okay. So
I think we're good.
There we go. Oh, it's good. I was like, oh no. Michelle, it might be just you.
She didn't hear that, Heidi.
We'll keep going. So as we talked about, the complexity of the guide data market leads to many of the screens or online guides being inaccurate. Now what I want to kind of touch base on is some best practices and some frequently asked questions. Now that we've kind of laid the foundation. So we kind of talked about this, how long will it take to update a guide, online guide? Again, depending on the station, it's going to take that 48 to 72 hours. Now, with Titan TV affiliates, as we talked about before, once you go and use MediaStar, so depending on what other products with us, it could be MediaStar Editor, Scheduler, or Manager, make the change and you have to publish. And it will automatically then update the guide on your website if you have the Titan TV Next Gen guide. And it will also update TitanTV.com. TitanTV.com normally takes a little bit longer to update, more just because it's going through a lot more information, but it's automatic on your actual site for our Next Gen guides. Another frequently asked question that we get, if I send my schedule out every week, why is the guide not getting updated? First, there's a few questions that we would ask you in return. How are you sending them out? Are you sending them out as a PDF? Are you sending in Excel? Are you putting it in just a Word document? How are you sending it out? And two, if you're sending it out in like a grid, are you highlighting the changes or making notes on the changes, or are you just resending the full schedule and assuming that they're going to know and be able to see it? The reason this is important is you have to understand that most of these data providers, they have editors that are sitting at a computer. They're looking at one screen here, and then they're going to pull up your Excel or your grid or your email, and they're going to look through it to try to find the changes, and then they're going to go manually update it in their system. If you're not making it easy for them to see those changes, that is where sometimes things get missed. And I know I've seen it here. Someone said, hey, our schedule's wrong. They send me the entire week of the schedule, and I have to try to figure out what's wrong. So that's one thing is we recommend, this example that we have some of our MediaStar users do. They're able to do with a change date, be able to highlight any changes they made in the last week that would then show up on the grid. So whatever you do, either highlight it as your changes, or I've seen people also just note it in an email with their grid attached. So if the editor wanted to see more, had some questions, they could refer back to that. And then here's an example too. So we also recommend that maybe you sent your full schedule the week earlier, and now you just have some changes. Just send the changes. Here's an example of what one of ours pulled out of our MediaStar tool, just listing the changes. And it includes the change date, and then if you had any additional notes, you can note that as well. Oh. So now we're going to move on. How do I get my local program show cards, logos, and thumbnail images updated on the guides? Now that a lot of the online guides and even on-screen guides now have all these images, we're getting more questions about these things are wrong. How do I get them updated? Who do I send them to? So here's some information that we want to provide to you. So updates for images on online and on-screen guides need to be sent to the data providers. So here's the list of their email addresses. These are the ones that you should be sending to, even if you have a contact, let's say at GraceNote, also send it to the TMS schedule at GraceNote for multiple reasons. One, if that person's out sick, that goes to the main one and somebody else there can pick it up and help recover that editor if they're on vacation. Or if that editor no longer there, you know that it is still going to the data provider and they'll be able to take care of it. And then if you're a Titan TV client, we still recommend you send it to all four because you want to make sure it's updated in all the systems. But we also have a tool called Client Media Manager tool that allows you to dynamically update those images on the Titan TV Next Gen affiliate guide on your website. That's from the channel logos to even show cards on a show that you want to be able to then display on your guide. Do we have any questions, Chelsea?
A comment actually about the online or cable guides being incorrect. Do you have any tips on what they can do maybe to make sure that it's, or other tips that the users can do to make sure that they're just getting that information and updating the correct platforms, other than highlighting I guess.
I would guess would be highlight if you're sending a report, highlight it, but then maybe even in the email body of the email, don't put a lot of wording in that body of the email, but maybe just some quick bullet points. Please, look at this date and this time, or please note we've got a new program, somewhere. And the idea too is they're reading a lot, so don't put a lot into an email, but make it so it's very clear and it's concise. That then if you have more details, it could be in that report.
How would you suggest updating program description information?
Is that my first question is that for a local program? Is that for a paid program? Is that for a network program, for a syndicated? Because there's different rules that each of the data providers have based on those different use cases. So let's say if it's a network program description, more than likely you can email the guide data providers, but they're not going to update it because they get those descriptions directly from the network. And then they're going to take those descriptions and put them in their language or their voice, as they call it. So all their descriptions kind of the same kind of voice. Now, if it's a local program, you can send it to them and say, this is what I want. But again, based on some of the rules that these data providers have set up, one example is anchors names. A lot of them have got out of adding or including any anchors names in your local news programs, partly because the anchors come and go quite often. And if you're not communicating with them on a regular basis that you've changed those anchors, and then all of a sudden 2 months later you notice, or a viewer noticed that that person's no longer there, then you have to go yell at the guide data providers, why didn't you remove it out? We're no longer there. So a lot of them have just removed those from the local one. If it's a paid program, again, there have been some lawsuits out there, was the best way to kind of put it, with guide data providers, because they took a paid program and they put all the description and they were, that wasn't a real product or it was being fraud. So a lot of times they're very leery. If it's paid program, their policy, it's paid program. Now, where it gets fuzzy is religious programs, because there are some religious times where it's a religious paid program, but because it's a religious program, maybe it's your local church that's doing it, but they're paying for that time slot. So a lot of times I always say in that situation, don't tell them it's a paid spot. Tell them this is a local show. They don't need to know the details. Of course, someone's gonna have to pay for something. And then that's for your local shows again. If it's something that you want for it to be a guide description, send it to them. But again, if they consider it a paid program, there's a highly likely chance they're just going to change it in any of where they provide guide data to a paid program. I hope that answered that question, but it wasn't a simple question.
I think that's it for questions as of right now.
Okay. So here's some more tips related to the images, show cards. When you're sending them, here are some things that you want to keep in mind when you send out images, or your creative department, digital department creates the images. Here's your preferred resolution. Then the preferred type is really a PNG with a transparent background. A JPEG is usable, but they prefer PNG. I know probably about 5 years ago, it was a vector file, but those files get so large and the data providers don't, with all the things they have to store, that's too big of a file. So that's why they prefer now a PNG with a transparent background. Preferred dimension is a 500 pixel by length. And I would always recommend that you send a landscape and a portrait version of any of your either channel logos or show cards. I know our system, when you upload in the client image upload tool, it'll automatically resize it as needed. But sometimes, as you know, if it's a landscape and a portrait, you've got extra space. So just kind of be conscious of that. If you don't like it with extra space, make sure you create both a landscape and a portrait, and then you send it off to all the guide data providers, even though you only found it in one. That way they know they have the most recent images and they can update their system. And last but not least, this is, again, a reminder. Make sure that to ensure that your program is being updated on your local cable, satellite, newspaper sites even. We didn't even talk about newspaper. I know there's still some out there that take guide data and publish it. Make sure you're sending this to your weekly, monthly schedules to these 4 data providers, email addresses, plus if you have an individual contact at each one of those, go ahead and send them out.
Heidi, could you also note that we will be sending out a recording of this webinar in a few days as well?
Yes, so everyone that had registered for this webinar, we will be sending out an email that will give you a link to this particular video that you can watch or pass on. We are also going to include in that email those guide data provider email addresses so that you have them in an email so you can copy and paste. We're going to also, include, oh, my mouse is not liking me, our customer care at titantv.com. So if there's ever any questions or something related to Titan TV guide services is not correct, we recommend, and best practice is you send it to customer care. That will go to myself and Chelsea, plus 4 other people on our customer care team. That way, again, if Chelsea and I are not here, we're at a trade show, on vacation, whatever it might be, we know somebody, somebody in our customer care team will be able to help you and will be able to take care of you. Any other questions out there? Well, if no questions, Chelsea, again, if you do have anything or you learned something that we didn't talk about and you want to learn more about it, or you want us to ask about it, or you found out that one of the platforms no longer provides data from one of the data providers we said, let us know. That's what we're here for. We're here for a resource and to try to provide you the information and tools then to always make sure that your programming is updated in any of the guide data providers guides in the industry. Thanks again and have a great day, everybody.